everyone, this is Miss Segovia, and I'm going to walk you through the notes on Gregor Mendel's laws of heredity for the genetics section of your notebook. So on the cover page again, you should have your genetics with your note cards. I just have note cards go here because I haven't put mine in yet. On the next page should be your awesome little Gregor Mendel Facebook profile, the notes on the work of Gregor Mendel, and then our next section we're going to work on right now is the one with the doohickey bug. This will be an activity that you do after you do your notes on Mendel's laws of heredity. So let me walk you through Mendel's laws of heredity. I'm just going to do them on a separate sheet of paper today, but yours of course should be in your notebook. So the question we're going to try to answer when we're doing our notes is, so put it at the top. Question is, what are the different forms of genes called? So we're talking a lot about genes and we're talking about the different traits and everything there, but what do we actually call those different forms of the genes or those different versions of a trait? So we're going to try to answer that in today's notes and we'll come back to this question. So the title for ours is Mendel's Laws of Heredity. So nice big underline to make that stand out. And don't forget that we're always going to try to do Cornell style notes, so if you need to, go ahead and put your line down the left, and then as always leave a couple lines at the very bottom so that you can do your summary when you're finished. Keeps those avid teachers all nice and happy. So let's start out first with what Mendel did. Mendel concluded that biological inheritance, gotta love those really big words, is determined by factors. Notice he's not saying genes, he's not saying traits, he's not saying proteins, he's saying factors. Because Mendel was around in the 1800s and that's all he really knew. There was something, but didn't know exactly what. So these factors, what we did know is that factors that are passed from one generation to the next. Now today, these factors that determine traits, another good vocab word for us today, are called genes. And so I know you've heard the term traits and you've heard the term genes. We're going to get into a little bit more specifically what we're referring to there. Still, have we answered our question? What are the different forms of genes called? Not quite yet. So our next one is, our next big definition is alleles. Alleles are different forms of genes. Oh wait, hold on a second. Different forms of genes are alleles. What are the different forms of a gene called? Alleles. That's your answer to your question right there. So let's get into a little bit more examples, such as your genes for height, that can either produce genes for tall plants or genes for short plants. So we really oversimplify in biology because in reality, height, there's a lot of other factors. Sometimes we'll talk about eye color with blue eyes versus green eyes. In honesty, there's a lot more to it, but we just kind of oversimplify with this version for now. So alleles, the different forms of the gene. So if we're talking about eye color, it could be the blue or the brown. If we're talking about height, short or tall. It could flower color, purple or white, so we just have the different versions that we can get. So Mendel recognized the fact that we have these different versions and we have the term alleles to go for that. So in Mendel's time in the 1800s he did come up with 2 laws. The first law sounds racist. Let's just be honest, it's the laws of segregation. But he was not talking about people and talking about all the stuff that's gone on. We're talking about genes and alleles and those factors that he was looking at. So every organism has 2 alleles. Of each gene. So where do we get 2 versions? Let's think about that for a second. And when gametes, so what's a gamete? In case you forgot, gametes are eggs and sperm. When they are produced, the alleles separate. So a big clue as to why do you have 2 versions of a gene? Well, if eggs and sperm are involved, you all have a mother and a father. And so you got one gene from mom and another gene from dad. Therefore, you have 2 genes. And when you go to make your offspring and you create your eggs or sperm, then you are going to give your children the option of inheriting the gene from their grandfather or the gene from their grandmother. And so Mendel noticed that every organism, when the eggs and sperm are being formed, so to speak, there would be 2 different versions of the gene that could be passed on to the offspring. Of course, factors, he didn't know genes, he didn't know DNA, but he knew that they were either going to get the tall or the short, the purple or the white, the yellow or the green, whatever it was. And so the law of segregation came about. And we'll come back to this law when we talk about meiosis. In the meantime, though, when it comes to actually seeing what we have, we've got 2 big terms we got to throw out to you that you better know. One is phenotype. Phenotype is the way an organism looks and behaves. So it's all about the appearance. What are you actually seeing here? And so if we talk about our example above, that could be tall versus short. That is our phenotype. Related to that is genotype. So genotype is the allele combination of an organism. Let me squeeze that in there. Sometimes you gotta write a little smaller. So the allele combination of the organism, it's looking at the actual genes themselves. And so if you're inheriting 2 genes, you have the option, you could have inherited both the big T genes. You could have inherited the big T, or the little t. And of course I'm using the words big and little. Really I should be using dominant and recessive. So we could have dominant, actually we refer to this as homozygous dominant, we'll come to that in a second, our heterozygous or our homozygous recessive. Now what's really interesting with our genotype versus phenotype is that if I have little t, my organism is going to be short because it's recessive. But if I inherit big T or big T, my organism, if it's complete dominance or Mendelian inheritance, will be tall. And I know we talked about it in class a little bit, but the proteins that are produced for that tall gene would actually be expressed more so than the shortness. And so that's either a gene that's produced or a protein that's not produced. But here, these 2 you would see tall. This one you would see short. So I threw out a couple new words to you there too, or maybe a review word. One is homozygous. So homozygous An organism is homozygous. And I know you've heard that word before. Homo means same. So homozygous for a trait if the two alleles for that trait are the same. So for example, the big T we refer to as homozygous dominant, and the little t is homozygous recessive. And again, just want to reiterate what I've talked about in class before. Dominant doesn't always mean better, and dominant doesn't always mean that you're going to see a lot of it. Dominant just means that the protein is being produced that is expressed. It's what we actually get to see. And so the famous example I like to use is the difference between dominant and recessive to push that fact home, is if your hand is like mine and you have 4 fingers and a thumb, you are homozygous recessive for the polydactyl trait. And so if you had 6 fingers, you would actually be carrying the dominant gene. And so again, dominant doesn't always mean good or the most, it just means that we see that. And so here I am homozygous recessive for my fingers because I have 4 fingers and a thumb and no extra digits. The opposite of homozygous is heterozygous. So an organism is heterozygous for a trait if its 2 alleles for the trait are different. And so that is if it is big T, little t. And so this one, it's like sexuality, and that's where most of you have probably heard the terms, homosexual and heterosexual. So homosexual is a same-sex couple, and so, male, male, or female, female. And so here, big T, little t, little t. Heterozygous, like a heterozygous couple, which would be a male and a female. Here we have the big T and the little t. Now I just want to put you over in the margins, for those of you doing the Cornell notes. Heterozygous has another term that we also use and you're going to hear, and that is hybrid. And so you might just want to put over here, what is a hybrid? A hybrid is a heterozygote. And so if you think of a hybrid car, it's both gasoline and electric. And so here, a heterozygous creature would have both the gene for tallness and the gene for shortness. So all of this is part of the first law, the law of segregation, determining how those genes get passed on. And we'll see more of that in the Punnett square. So a good question up here is, what is the first law? Is Mendel's. Let's be more specific. So it's the law of segregation. And then, of course, if we have the first law, that means we also need to have a second law. And so that second law is the law of independent assortment. And so in this law, get that on the screen, genes for different traits are inherited independently of each other. So, in a dihybrid, oops, sorry, got a little dyslexic there, BR, dihybrid cross, which is a cross where we're looking at 2 traits. You can see both of Mendel's laws at work. Now I know right now that doesn't give you a whole lot of explanation, but when we get into the bigger dihybrid crosses where we're looking at multiple traits, you'll see more of what it means to have genes that are inherited separately. We'll also talk a little bit this year about linked genes, which are genes that are inherited together. And so if you have certain traits, you'll also get other traits, kind of like a package deal. And so in Mendel's time, and Mendel got really lucky with his pea plants, he saw things inherited totally independently of one another. So pea color and plant height could be inherited and we could see the trends, but they were totally unrelated to one another. And so it was kind of a thing where he lucked out a little bit, or maybe because he was in the monastery, it was a little divine intervention. But either way, he was able to do some really good statistics and see a lot of those great relationships. By the way, this one right here, if this was our first law up on top, that means the law of independent assortment is the second law. So we can add a little question, what is Mendel's second law? All right, and so that's it for the notes here. Don't forget to do your summary down at the bottom and add a few more questions along the side. Make sure you're familiar with your vocab words, factors, trait, and genes, alleles, phenotype, genotype, homozygous, and heterozygous. We'll be using that quite a bit in this unit. So that's it for now. Make sure you keep working forward on the next stuff. Thank you.